I love this thing. I mean, look at it. The Atari Lynx is the embodiment of retro handheld gaming, at least aesthetically. It's huge, it's mean looking, it's slick, it weighs a ton, it uses 6 AA batteries within an hour, and it has a screen the size of a peanut. And yet, I wouldn't change a thing about the Atari Lynx. Or would I? Well, of course I would, or else I wouldn't be sitting here in this tight corner, playing this thing awkwardly in front of my camera with the mic beside me. You see, recently I picked up this Atari Lynx knowing it had seen better days. It was in dire need of some soldering action just to get it working again, but that's not what piqued my interest. No, you see, it's the casing. The previous owner or owners had a hell of a time with it, and I'm all for it. I love it when a console is used extensively and it has the patina to show for it. But still, I wanted to do something different. I want to see if I can restore this Lynx to its former glory just with my bare hands. See if I can make it look brand new again, but with minimal resources and minimal spending, so no industrial or complex machinery, just my bare hands and some tools and stuff you can find at your local hardware store. So, you interested? Well, then let's get started. Now that you had a closer look at the actual condition of the Lynx, let's have a last glance at the most important parts that need to be addressed for this restoration. The hardest to look at are of course these 2 nasty holes. A rather common mistake by many that ever took apart the shell of the Lynx. Different screws are used for either sides. Pick the wrong screws and your poor Lynx is permanently wounded. Not much else is left to talk about concerning the front of the Lynx, other than the paint that's coming off. Let's take a look at the back, where the patina has grown a bit more self-confident. This side doesn't even try to defend its condition, and the fact that a fresh paint job would be very welcome. Of course, when repainting the shell, the labels will need to be replaced, so we'll have a go at that as well. I'll also work on the game card cover, since it seems to be bent a little and not closing properly. I thought it would be a good idea to give you some information regarding this Lynx and why the paint on this model is so fragile. The model I'll be restoring is the PAG-0201. My other Lynx is a PAG-0200. The major difference between the two is the shell. The 0201 consists of a silvery plastic mold, while the 0200 consists of a dark gray mold. I strongly prefer the latter, since the plastic itself forms the color of the Lynx instead of a simple paint job. Another difference would be the D-pad. The 0200 model only has the cross as a D-pad, whereas the 0201 model has the complete circular pad as moving D-pad. Another win for the 0200 model if you ask me. Now for a quick summary of how we're going to restore the Lynx. First, we'll of course have to disassemble the Lynx, since it's only the shell that needs to be restored. With the loose shell at our disposal, we'll have to strip the paint to ensure we have a clean surface to work with. Once the shell is completely, shall we say, naked, it gives us a great opportunity to fix some damages. After necessary preparations, we'll be ready to apply the primer and the base coat. Once the base coat is dried and hardened, we'll have a look at creating and applying the necessary decals. To seal the decals and to preserve the paint job, the Lynx will receive a last clear coat of paint. As mentioned, we'll also need to create some new labels to replace the original ones. Then it will finally be time to reassemble the Lynx and see the final result. Lastly, we'll talk about the final conclusion, lessons learned, and summarize the costs for this restoration. Alright then, let's do this thing, shall we? It's my first time disassembling a Lynx. It's pretty straightforward, although I wasn't quite sure what to do with the inner battery compartment, since the battery pads are difficult to remove, unless you're willing to desolder the wires, but I didn't feel like doing that. But after a close inspection, it turns out it's in nice condition still, so the inner battery compartment and its label will remain untouched. Otherwise, no rocket science here. Just be smarter than me and don't forget there's possibly a game card still inserted. Now we can work on the shell without worrying about the Lynx's guts. I really wish there was some easy way of removing the screen lens, but I couldn't figure out how. We'll just have to be very careful with it for the remainder of the restoration. Before we can strip the paint, we need to remove the labels. Later on we'll replace them with new ones. These ones look terribly worn, so no loss there. An easy way to remove labels in general is by using a simple hairdryer. The heat softens the glue just enough to remove the labels. Of course, there will be some glue residue left, but that's okay, since we'll strip the paint anyway. To strip the paint, we'll first try a basic oven cleaner. Please keep in mind though, this stuff is hazardous. We'll make use of some wrapping foil to prevent the oven cleaner from vaporizing too quickly. That way its cleaning process will be as effective as possible. Applying the cleaner is simple. There's no need to be over excessive, we'll just need to make sure the shell is completely covered in cleaning compound. We'll set it aside for 24 hours and then we'll take a look if we're just being silly or if it actually works. Now let's see if the paint will budge. I somehow failed to make or save the recording of cleaning the shell after the first dipping session, so here's the footage after the second 24 hours of oven cleaner. It's doing a respectable job, but unfortunately it's not enough. After a third session, the result remained the same. Time for Plan B. Which is used car brake fluid. I've heard it does a great job of eating away paint on plastic components without corroding the plastic itself. But alas, it seems to have even less of an effect than the oven cleaner. Back to the oven cleaner then, but also a little fast forward in the process. I'm not too worried about the screen lens being damaged by the oven cleaner, but for good measure we'll apply some masking tape. All in all, it took about 3 oven cleaner dipping sessions for each plastic part to get a decent result. Also, by this time I found out that under running hot water the paint comes off even a bit easier. Using some sandpaper for the last bits of paint gives us a well enough paintless shell. The use of sandpaper reveals there's actually a dark grayish color underneath the silvery color. But anyway, time to move on. There's no better time to fix any damages to the shell than now. We'll start off with the game card cover. It's a bit wobbly when closed, and I noticed the 2 outer hinges are bent. It's hard to see on the video, but this most likely causes the wobbliness. We'll take a bowl of boiling water because heat will help to reshape the hinges a little. With pliers, we'll keep the hinges under pressure while heating up. This will probably be enough to force the plastic to be bent a little, without using any excessive force. After half a minute or so, we take it out and let it cool off a bit. Maybe still hard to see, but it's way better now. I'm confident the wobbliness has been reduced greatly. And how could we forget those nasty holes near the D-pad? Fixing these will be a sweet upgrade to our poor Lynx. We'll of course fill up the holes with some putty. But before we do that, we'll roughen the edges of the holes to ensure the putty will stick to the surface as good as possible. As always, a clean and dust-free surface is important for a good application. To fill up the holes, we'll use some basic polyester putty. Mix it with some hardening paste. And then fill up the holes. I ended up repeating this step once more for a nice finish, ready to smooth it out with sandpaper. It's finally time to do some painting. To prepare the shell, it needs to be sanded. For primer only, sanding with 600 grit sandpaper should be fine. I prefer wet sanding, although for paintless surfaces dry sanding is okay too. Of course, before painting, the screen lens will have to be masked again. It's important we don't forget to mask the inside as well. Cleaning the shell before painting is obviously very important. Now, with a sanded, dust and grease-free surface, the primer will do its job. We'll go for a black primer since it will have a darkening effect on the final color of the Lynx. Besides a matte finish, the final gray color of the Lynx will need to be as flat as possible. The black primer will help with that. Round 2 of wet sanding. For the base coat, we'll go with 1200 grit sandpaper this time for a smoother paint result. Also, we don't want to risk sanding off too much of the primer. Further, the paint process is no different from the primer process. Will you look at that? I'm actually really pleased with the paint result thus far. The most challenging part will be the button decals. The design, however, is relatively simple, so I recreated the decals in Photoshop. The font used is Helvetica, and with the right spacing and scaling, you can make identical copies of the original decals. For application, I'm using printable decal paper, often used in scale modeling. It's very thin, transparent paper on top of a transfer sheet. This paper is suitable for both ink and laser printers. The print result looks pretty decent. Now let's see what it does. We cut out one of the button labels and simply dip it in water for a few seconds. The decal then releases from the transfer sheet and can be applied. Unfortunately, this technique only seems to be suitable for white backgrounds. I'm fairly disappointed with that. Plan B is not very different. We'll try our luck with printable transparent adhesive film. Again, suitable for both ink and laser printers. The application is a bit easier. Just peel off the transfer sheet and apply the decal. The outcome, unfortunately, is the same. The print is too transparent to be visible. I may not sound very bummed out by this, but in reality, yeah. So, is there a plan C? Well, there is, but this one asks for another approach. Printing on regular white adhesive film calls for a colored background, so I changed the design with different background colors to find a matching one. There is always a little bit difference in color, so make sure to cut out the decals with little margins. We'll apply all the decals to see the whole thing. I don't know how I feel about this. I'm hoping the last layers of clear paint will somehow smooth out the decals and it will be less rough on the edges. We'll see. As for the clear paint, I can show you no groundbreaking footage, except for my way too sunny outfit, of course. Now what we're most curious to see is how the decals look under a fresh layer of clear paint. Honestly, I really don't like it at all. If this is the best possible result with the resources I have, then I prefer no decals at all. So call me crazy, but they gots to go. So back to sanding. One last time, preparing the shell for its true final layer of paint. Time for a nice finishing touch before reassembly. I made a scan of the links before I removed the labels. With those scans I made an exact copy of the labels in Photoshop. As background color, we'll go with a slightly darker shade of grey compared to the shell, just like the original ones. The labels are printed on printable white label paper. Now we'll have to make sure the labels are cut out really nice and precisely for that nice factory finish. To apply labels, first I always peel off a small piece of transfer paper. With most of the transfer paper still in place, you can easily align the label in the position you want. Then, after pressing down the first part of the label, you can peel off the rest of the transfer paper and apply the label perfectly in position. In case you're wondering, the original serial number was a separate sticker as well, and it was placed at an angle, that's why it seems a bit off. I think the labels came out very nicely, so I'm happy with that, especially after failing the decals. I wasn't too worried, but you never know for sure if any paint managed to squeeze itself underneath the masking tape. Fortunately, the screen lens is completely clean from paint. Positioning the battery compartment and the PCB is easy. Just align the holes in the PCB with the molded screw stands. Before reassembly, I gave the button covers and rubber pads a good scrub. They could certainly use it. It's quite finicky getting the top shell in place without bumping the buttons out of position. Just be patient and it will fit together nicely. We're almost there. Like mentioned before, be very careful with selecting the right screws, or else you'll be looking at those nasty holes again. But if you take a closer look, it should be obvious in which holes the long screws should be inserted. Well, if you watched the whole thing up to this point, I commend you. Excellent. So, here we are. The moment of the big reveal. Did it turn out to be anything worth of the Atari Lynx legacy, or is it so bad that it should be buried in Alamogordo along with those ET cartridges? Let's take a look. Nah, that will be so lame. Here you go. So, there you have it. What do you think? Personally, I'm pretty happy with the result. I mean, we did manage to fix the holes. The game card cover's fixed, it's not as wobbly anymore. The labels look pretty decent. And the paint job is, well, it's immaculate. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with the result. However, I failed to recreate the button decals, which is a loss, I realized that. I went into this project blind and I thought I could pull it off, but unfortunately I wasn't able to. But still, in the end, I think it looks pretty decent and worth of the Atari Lynx legacy. As for the resources for this restoration, I didn't include the decal paper and the transparent adhesive film once I used to create the button decals, because in the end I didn't end up using them. I'm also not showing the used car brake fluid for removing the paint, because in the end the oven cleaner did the job. This in total cost me about 35 euros, which at this point in time is, I believe, about 42 American dollars. So, should you do a restore of an Atari Lynx, you be the judge of that. But if you have one lying around in dire need of some TLC, then I'd say go for it. Definitely go for it. I love doing it. It was a pretty challenging project to do. It took me a couple of months. That's mostly because I have a busy life, but over the course of those couple of months it took me several hours to do, so it's not something you do in a day or in a week. It's something you really need to take time to do. But other than that, sure, go for it. So on that note, I'm gonna wrap this up. I really hope you did like the video. Maybe it even inspires some of you to do the same thing, to do a restoration of an Atari Lynx or maybe another console. That's up to you. But yeah, thank you so much for watching and take care.